Long story short, at its core, IFS therapy is unscientific and dangerous. But before you click away because you think I don't understand the value of metaphor or that I'm some sycophant at the altar of science, let me just tell you, my daddy was a preacher.
Hello. Is IFS psychotherapy or spirituality dressed up as psychology? That's the question. Most people think internal family systems is a breakthrough trauma therapy, now even labeled evidence-based. Thousands of therapists swear by it, and it's spreading fast into coaching, spirituality, even medicine. But here's the catch. Critics like Leah, which is a psychotherapist, argue that IFS doesn't just use metaphors, it reifies them. It turns inner states into literal beings, mixes in shamanic entities and sending into the light, leans on teen studies, and risks convincing clients they have multiple personalities inside them. And when I went back to Richard Schwartz's own talks and interviews, the founder himself, I found exactly those 4 points, which aren't just critics from outside. They show up in his own words. So in this video, I'm going to break down, first, how IFS reifies metaphors into parts and subpersonalities. Second, where it openly blends psychotherapy with spirituality. Third, what the actual evidence base looks like. And fourth, the hidden risks of installing maladaptive beliefs. By the end, you'll see why the debate isn't just about whether IFS works, it's about whether it's psychology at all, or something else entirely.
So Dick, can you tell us what parts are within the IFS system?
Parts turn out to be little personalities inside, full-range personalities.
Chapter 1. How IFS reifies metaphors into parts and subpersonalities. Every psychotherapy model relies on metaphor. Freud had an ego and a superego. Jung gave us the archetypes. CBT talks about distortions and automatic thoughts. None of these are physical objects in the brain. They're symbolic handles to help us work with something invisible. But here's the problem with IFS. It doesn't just use metaphor, it reifies it. It treats the metaphor as if it were a literal reality. Richard Schwartz, the founder of IFS, says again and again that we're all multiple personalities in the sense that we all have parts. What are called alters in DID are really what we call parts. He of course says that these persons diagnosed with DID, they are just more fragmented than the rest of us, but we all have parts. That's not a metaphorical description. That's a categorical claim. The human mind is naturally subdivided into people inside of people. Critics like Leah argue this is where IFS crosses the line. Instead of using part language as a shorthand, a part of me feels anxious, a part of me wants to succeed. Schwartz encourages clients to dialogue with these parts as if they were independent beings. He has them asked, "How old are you? What do you want me to know?" and wait for answers. And here's the risk. Once you install the belief that there are multiple personalities inside you, every passing thought or emotional surge can be interpreted as evidence of a new part. The metaphor becomes a framework that creates what it claims to describe. Leah's critique is that IFS doesn't just flirt with this, it builds the entire system on it. Now defenders will say that this is no different than the empty chair in Gestalt therapy, a dramatization to make inner conflict more workable. But there is a key difference. Gestalt never asked clients to believe that chair really contains another being. The client is always aware that they are projecting their own thoughts and feelings into role play.
And when I would ask people about who is that, I'd say, what part is that? They'd say, that's not a part like these others. That's me. That's myself. So we came to call that the capital S, self. Always undamaged kind of essence that often would have compassion just immediately for the part they were working with, for the person they were talking to.
Chapter 2, where IFS blends psychotherapy with spirituality. Most therapy schools borrow language from philosophy or spirituality. Carl Rogers, for example, spoke of unconditional positive regard in ways that echoed Christian grace. That overlap isn't new, but with IFS, the overlap isn't subtle, it's front and center.
So I couldn't square that observation with traditional psychology. It wasn't until people steered me toward spirituality that I could see that virtually every spiritual tradition has a word for this, and almost no psychotherapies do.
Wow.
And so Buddha nature or Atman or...
Richard Schwartz repeatedly describes the self, the core healing presence in IFS, in explicitly spiritual terms. He calls it an essence that can be damaged, that radiates the 8 C's: calm, clarity, courage, compassion, curiosity, confidence, creativity, and connectedness. He says this self is not something learned from relationships, as attachment theory claims, but something innate, a drop of the ocean of God. That's not psychology, that's metaphysics. In his own words, Schwartz links the self directly to Hinduism, Buddhism, and mystical traditions. He openly frames it as a spiritual reality that transcends trauma and personal history. In one interview, he even said the IFS model was loaned to him by guides, spiritual entities he communicates with. It goes further. In IFS practice, clients are sometimes guided to encounter what Schwartz calls unattached burdens or hostile energies that aren't part of the self, but free-floating entities that attach to people during trauma or dissociation. Where they attach from? I don't know.
People are bringing in hostile energies as protectors, but the protectors actually don't belong to them somehow. Have you seen this?
Yeah, yes, we do run into things that clearly are not parts. And when approached, we'll acknowledge that they don't belong inside the person.
The IFS method had the client send them to the light. That's indistinguishable from shamanic practice. These guys are basically the modern day shamans. Critics argue this crosses the line. Psychotherapy is supposed to rest on cognitive science and clinical method. By mixing in entities, light rituals, and spiritual guides, IFS risks presenting itself as both therapy and religion, without making the distinction clear. Now, defenders push back. They say Schwartz is simply naming what clients already experience. I mean, that's kind of true, even in my own experience. Many people in psychedelic sessions, trauma states, or deep meditation do report lights, voices, and guides. IFS doesn't create this phenomena. I mean, it existed for thousands of years. In that sense, it's pragmatic, not doctrinal. Chapter 3. What the actual evidence base looks like. When supporters defend IFS, one of the first things they point out is that it's evidence-based. The IFS Institute itself lists research studies and highlights its inclusion in the US government National Registry of Evidence-Based Programs and Practices. On the surface, that sounds airtight. The science has spoken, case closed. If you dig deeper, the evidence base is surprisingly thin. The landmark study most often cited is a 2013 randomized trial on rheumatoid arthritis patients. Participants who received IFS therapy showed improvements in pain, depression, and self-compassion compared to controls. That sounds promising, but the trial had only 70 participants, almost all white, Catholic women from Boston. That's not a representative sample, and the effects haven't been replicated on a large scale yet. Another often cited study is a pilot trial on PTSD in veterans. Again, results looked encouraging, lower symptom scores, higher well-being, but the sample was tiny, fewer than 20 veterans. Beyond that, the research thins out into case studies, dissertations, and non-peer-reviewed write-ups. There are no large multi-site randomized control trials, no long-term follow-ups across diverse populations, and no robust comparisons with gold standard trauma treatments like CBT, EMDR, or exposure therapy. Meanwhile, Schwartz himself is candid that much of IFS came from trial and error with clients. He repeatedly says he just followed the data in session, experimenting with inner dialogues and symbolic rituals until something seemed to work. That's how unburdenings, sending burdens to the light, or water, or earth, or fire, and the 8 C's all emerge from. To be clear, that doesn't mean IFS doesn't work. It means the scientific evidence is preliminary at best. Right now, the model is running on anecdotal success, clinical enthusiasm, and client testimonials. Critics say that calling IFS evidence-based on the strength of a handful of small trials is overstating the case. Defenders counter that every new therapy starts this way. CBT itself began with small, shaky studies in the 70s. From their view, the enthusiasm is justified, and the research base will catch up.
Unlike some of these other burdens that I've talked about, these things have a kind of life of their own, and so we call them unattached burdens because they're not attached to a part, they're freestanding, and they're often very nasty. They just want to do damage.
Right.
Either to damage the person or to make the person hurt others.
Chapter 4: The hidden risks of installing maladaptive beliefs. Psychotherapy has multiple hard ethical boundaries. One of the clearest is that therapists must not install beliefs in vulnerable clients. That's why mainstream therapy is so careful with suggestion. Therapists are trained to avoid leading questions, avoid implanting memories, and avoid giving clients ready-made interpretations. The reason is simple. When someone is in a fragile, suggestible state, they are wide open to absorbing whatever narrative the therapist offers. History is full of cautionary tales. The satanic panic of the 1980s, fueled by therapists who unwittingly implanted false memories. Hypnotherapists who reinforced delusions instead of resolving them. Now look at what IFS does. Clients are asked to find the part of you that's a 4-year-old. To be fair, they don't really ask you to find a 4-year-old. They go through, well, what happens to you? How do you feel? Is there any part of your body that stands out? Or is any part of you that is stressing you at the moment? Is there any thought or something that comes to your mind that wants to express itself? It doesn't really just jumps into, well, where is the 4-year-old? But they go following the client representation. Schwartz himself frames these as real subpersonalities, not metaphors, literal people frozen into time. This isn't neutral. This installs a belief system. You don't just have feelings, you have multiple beings inside you. Some are children, some are protectors, some are foreign entities. Once adopted, this worldview reshapes how the client interprets every future experience. And that's true because everyone in IFS circles, they start talking about, what's your sad part says today? They actually start talking like this with, well, I have a part today that wants this, or my part that wants revenge is coming up. They basically, even at conferences and everywhere, they talk about this part, the part, and this part, and that part, and yeah. A bad mood isn't anymore as I feel off or it's my firefighter taking over. An intrusive thought isn't my brain is stressed or my body is stressed or I have an unprocessed emotion that's flaring up. It's a burdened part is speaking, or the 4-year-old is speaking, or the 13-year-old is speaking. For vulnerable clients, people who already are struggling with dissociation, psychosis, or spiritual confusion, this is gasoline on the fire. The therapeutic technique itself can create the pathology it claims to treat. This is why critics argue IFS is skating on dangerous ground. By blurring metaphor into ontology, it risks inducing dissociation, magical thinking, or even psychotic processes in clients who came in seeking help. That's what Leah basically argues, and her point is that you can, of course, go watch her video. But her point, as far as I understand it, is that IFS is dangerous because it can lead to psychosis for vulnerable clients. In almost every other branch of psychotherapy, this kind of suggestive installation would be considered malpractice. Why supporters do think it helps though? To be fair, there is a stillman here. Defenders argue that all therapy installs beliefs. The question is which ones? CBT installs the belief thoughts are not facts, they can be challenged. EMDR installs the belief trauma memories can be reprocessed and lose their power. Psychodynamic therapy installs the belief your present struggles are tied to unconscious conflicts from the past. IFS simply makes this belief experiential and relational. By externalizing shame, fear, or trauma into a part, clients can interact with it rather than be drowned in it. It's not deception, it's dramatization. And as long as clients understand that these are therapeutic constructs, not literal beings, the harm or the risk for harm is minimal. Some even argue that reification is actually the point. The human brain relates better to characters than to abstractions. I have this feeling, talking to the critic or the child is easier than wrestling with an amorphous shame or enormous fear or whatever feelings you're dealing with. In this view, IFS doesn't implant pathology. It gives clients a usable framework for self-compassion. So, where does all of this leave us?
I, for one, will never be using IFS, and I will continue to take every chance I get to repeat, in the interest of the most vulnerable patients, that it's bonkers.
Well, we've seen how IFS reifies metaphors into ritual parts, or beings, how it openly blends psychotherapy with spirituality, how its evidence base is promising, but still preliminary, and how its techniques risk installing beliefs that can destabilize vulnerable clients. The picture is complicated. On one hand, thousands of people report healing, and clinicians praise IFS for its compassion and accessibility. On the other hand, the models blurs the boundary between psychology and metaphysics in ways that most therapies would consider ethically off limits. The path forward isn't to dismiss IFS outright, nor to canonize it as the next gold standard. What's needed are larger independent studies that put the model to the test across diverse populations, long-term outcomes and head-to-head comparisons, maybe even a trauma diary or a trauma journal where you can report side effects. I have been impacted, but I have no way to report anything. I don't know where to report it, or I'm making these YouTube videos. And just as important, clear boundaries, because at the end of the day, psychotherapy's power lies in helping people face reality, not in replacing one belief system with another. No matter what you think about this, I hope love, peace, and kindness find you. Before you go, if you like this video, feel free to watch this video in which I speak about the risks of IFS therapy. Until next time, Benjamin.